Well, everybody, welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. I'm Nick Palavita. I'll be your moderator for today's show. And today's show, we're going to be discussing something that is starting to hit the news finally, and that is, of course, China. And the interesting thing about China right now is the vast amount of real estate that China owns in the US or farmland. And the real question is, should we be worried about it? In other words, to what extent can China come to the United States and just farmland? And the other problem that we have, not only do they buy farmland directly that we know about, it's so easy in the US to go form a corporation and then have the corporation buy the land and no one knows who the owner is. There was a new law that was passed and it's being challenged in the courts, and the court struck it down, which I thought was weird right now, that forces the ultimate beneficial owner of corporations to be disclosed into a federal database. And the due date is the end of this year. And I have corporations. I'm going, am I have to disclose all the ultimate beneficial owners or not? It's a very new law. But as you can see, even if they didn't directly own real estate, if you can just bypass the system by creating a corporation, have the corporation own the real estate, and you own the corporation, all of a sudden China owns most of the United States of America. So with that, we're going to bring in somebody who, to start with it, may have some thoughts on this. The former Comptroller General of the United States, the Honorable David M. Walker, who wrote the great book. I've got it back here. If you haven't got it yet, you have to get it. It's called American 2040, Still a Superpower. And at the rate we're going, probably not, or it's going to be difficult. So with that, we're going to bring in the Honorable David M. Walker. David, China rising in the United States, not. What are your thoughts?
Good to be with you. Hopefully you've got the latest version of the book rather than the original version of the book, which is the one you showed. But look, let's talk a little bit about the big picture, and then we can get into this issue. China thinks long term. They have a strategic plan. They have a largely state-run economy, and they execute their plan. And one of the aspects of their plan is to acquire access to key property that is either agricultural producing or rich with rare earth minerals or other valuable minerals and commodities, if you will. It's part of their Belt and Road Initiative, which has economic, diplomatic, military, and cultural implications. And one aspect of it is to try to be able to acquire agricultural land in the United States. In many cases, that agricultural land may have a dual benefit, not only to be able to produce food, but also to have a close proximity to installations that the Chinese care about and would like to monitor, such as military bases. The U.S. has no plan. The U.S. is unlike China, and again, we got a lot more positives than China, so don't get me wrong, but planning is not one of them, and coordination is not one of them. In China, they gain access to all information and can direct the provinces what to do. In the United States, separation of powers, states are sovereign entities, and therefore they have the ability to do certain things. And in many cases, there's not information sharing between the states on this type of stuff. We've seen some states start taking action to limit the ability of Chinese investors to be able to invest in agricultural property and or property that's close to military bases. But, you point out yourself, Nick, that there are ways to get around that if you end up forming a corporation and you don't really know who the beneficial owners are. And so it may not be a direct ownership, may be an indirect ownership. So it's bottom line is, I come back to where I started. The United States needs a strategic plan that is future focused, that focuses on economic, diplomatic, military, and other issues, that is outcome based and is resource constrained. And one aspect of that is to understand the difference between allies and adversaries, and being able to differentiate between how you want to treat those two categories of countries in this particular case. And when I say adversaries, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're ever going to have a kinetic conflict with China. Hopefully we never will. But we do need to recognize that we do have some adverse interests that we need to be aware of and take appropriate steps to manage.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. Now, in this particular show, that we like people to know China has a plan and not us, which is not very good. Before our panel gets on, I am going to be sending this show to Understanding China. For those people who don't know about Understanding China, it is a Facebook group that has about 150,000 people. And Steve Tan, and I become sort of buddies because he runs the group there. But it's currently, David, it's our access to China. So when we distribute the show, it'll go there. But also ask the panelists to please be nice, because the Chinese are very sensitive to people that aren't nice to China. Now, I'm not going to say they're going to be nice to us, but
Nick, as you may know, when I was Comptroller General of the United States, I had very good relations with my Chinese counterpart, the Chinese National Audit Office, which has at the time had about 90,000 employees, and they did audit work both at the federal, state, and local level. Mm-hmm. I was instrumental in getting them to be one of the supreme audit institutions that was able to be part of the audit of the United Nations. In addition to that, I had the opportunity to meet with two Chinese premiers, one of which asked me if I could do one thing to help improve transparency and accountability in China, what would it be? And I said I would make all the audit reports of the Chinese National Audit Office public. They'd never been public in the history of China. He did it within 6 months. My counterpart, Li Xinhua, became Economic Patriot of the Year in China, was later put on the Central Committee for the PRC. And so, look, I mean, I believe that we're competitors. We're potential adversaries. But I think we need to work for mutuality of interest, and I don't think it's inevitable that we're going to have conflict, and I hope and pray that we never do.
Right, and I do have the new book, America 2040.
There you go. Now you
those who haven't got it, you can buy it on the Pod TV bookstore at podtv.tv, so it is available. So with that, since this will be broadcast into China, by the way, that's the only way I know how to get into the Chinese market, as I backdoor through Facebook. But with that, we'll bring somebody in from Canada who may have some thoughts on this. Sasha Starr, Rick Rosner from the Los Angeles area, and of course, Mark Lee, who's from the United States. And the Duke University actually has a joint venture with China, a Chinese university. So you can actually, at Duke, you can actually do part of your education over in the mainland China area. Yeah, Rick, what's your thoughts on this?
So, I mean, China can afford to be patient. They have 4 times our population. They study their asses off. I don't know if every kid in China learns calculus, but across all of East Asia, they study their butts off. And, you know, China has hundreds of cities, but each have a population of over 1 million, and these are technology centers. China has spent the last 20, 30 years pushing the people off the farms and into cities to do tech. So the battle for the future is the battle for technological superiority. But to go back to farmland, we probably don't want China buying land next to all our missile bases. But, so I looked it up, about 3% of U.S. privately held land is owned by foreign entities. The biggest owner is Canada. Canada owns 1/3 of all foreign-owned land in the U.S., which makes sense. They probably, if you're on the border, if you're a farmer in Canada and you can buy a chunk of land that's just across the border from you, you buy that. China owned, at least according to public entities, maybe they secretly own more, but according to public records, China owns less than 1% of the foreign-owned land in the U.S.
The key word there, Rick,
Russia and Canada.
the key word there is, well, the key assumption there is assuming that the records are accurate with regard to beneficial ownership, and that's one of the challenges. That
Right.
But we
we
need
do
to
have
watch
somebody
out for
from Canada.
Canada is
Sasha will
buying
respond.
America.
Yeah.
I'd like to remind you that back 30, maybe even 40 years ago, the Japanese bought Rockefeller Center in New York. And a lot of people were quite unhappy about that. And although Japanese paid extraordinary price for that property, and a few years later, when there was a crisis and so on, they had to give it up almost for nothing, like a fraction of the price of what they paid for it. Now, let me ask you, what happened if indeed Chinese owned entities, or directly, or in this case indirectly, they would indeed acquire some U.S. land, and U.S. would raise taxes, including property taxes on that particular land, and would keep this increase until such time as they just will have to give up all these properties.
Well, I mean, that's a good question. They do, when they purchase real estate in the United States, they do face political risk. I mean, and you can see that already in TikTok, that's owned by ByteDance, that the U.S. passed a special law to force the divestiture of ByteDance from the Chinese government, which I think is a little ticky-tacky. But the thing is, they're ticky-tacking TikTok. So you're right, Sasha. Whenever they buy things like farmland in the United States, they are subjecting themselves to what I call political risk in the U.S. We just said a special tax, an assessment, a forced divestiture, and things of that nature. But like, what the real problem is, how much is being purchased through entities, and you don't know who the ultimate beneficial owner is.
Or just investigate these entities, bring these people, their directors, put them in jail, and they will immediately tell you who owns it and how long.
They have a new law on the books that attorneys are supposed to disclose, or if you have an ultimate beneficial owner, you're supposed to disclose who the beneficial owners are of your closely held companies into a federal database. That law is sitting on our books right now. It's been challenged in the courts successfully right now, so that it's sitting in limbo. So they are moving toward that, gathering the information as to who actually owns what in the U.S. But for decades, you can come to the U.S., create a closely held company, purchase assets, and no one knows who the owner is. It's almost because it's not public record that's disclosed anywhere. Rick.
So the way to compete with China is for us to make good stuff. In the 50s, Japan was known for making cheap crap, and the U.S. owned the world's manufacturing. Then in the 70s, we were making cars that were crappy, that would last 5-6 years. And all of a sudden, Japan started owning the auto market by making cars that would last 10 or 15 years. And it took the U.S. a decade or two to figure out, we need to make better, less crappy cars. And in the battle for the future, we're going to need to make, the world's best, like, robots, because we have declining populations across the world. And when we have a ton of old people who need care, and we need people to fill jobs, like, automation is going to fill a lot of those jobs, and we need to be the world's automation supplier.
Well, we do. We also have to recognize that, people can undercut us every day of the week with regard to wages. And, you know, we have a lot tougher environmental laws. We have a lot tougher labor laws. Our average wages for comparable positions in the United States versus many other countries are a lot higher. And therefore, we've got to compete on innovation. We've got to compete on productivity. We've got to compete on quality. But it also means that to the extent that we're going to start onshoring some of these things, if we don't end up innovating, if we don't end up improving productivity, if we don't end up leveraging technology to a great extent, it means it's going to be another upward pressure on prices. So we have to take steps on multiple fronts. I'm confident the private sector will end up doing things, because if they don't do things, they lose their competitive posture and potentially go out of business. The one I'm concerned about is the one that's a monopoly, which is the federal government, which already spends way more money than it takes in, and it doesn't generate adequate return on investment for the taxpayers. That's what I'm concerned about. By the way, last thing, Sasha, I think the main thing that people are concerned about here is the proximity of the land to sensitive military installations. I mean, based on what we know right now, I don't think the Chinese own a material percentage of our agricultural property in the United States. But the mere fact that we have no way to find out with any degree of reliability is a problem in and of itself. And by the way, this is not the only thing that we don't have the ability to find out with a reasonable degree of probability.
David, for future proposed acquisition of these lands, just make the law that the corporation has to disclose, which is buying land in the United States, has to disclose its beneficiaries, and that's just it. And then you see that there are Chinese beneficiaries, you just stop the sale. Just very simple. And don't try to play a nice guy, which you are not. Just do whatever is necessary. And that's it.
Well, Sasha, I assume you're talking about the country rather than me, because I try to be a nice guy, I know.
I know. Of course you are.
You're definitely a nice guy and everything. I did have a quick question for you, because apparently last month the Chinese exports rose by 6%, and I am not the economist that you are, so I'm trying to understand why it rose by that number. But I do know that a lot of the things that China is exporting, we seem to be very much dependent on, and Rick kind of alluded to that. So are we going to be able to wean ourselves away from the integrated circuits? Because I know that Sasha is very much into NVIDIA and the computers and the broadcasting equipment and even the office machine parts, because apparently those are the top 4 items, not necessarily in the order that I just said them and everything. And of course, as we all know, if you look at the back of your clothes, there's a lot of money that is coming in from the 5th item, which is clothing, coming from China as well. So are we going to be able to get ourselves away from having this kind of dependence on some very vital Chinese products?
Well, several things. One, the Chinese actually were slower coming out of the pandemic than we were. They actually took a harder line with regard to their population in that regard. Secondly, there are several different kinds of things that we get from China. Some are more of strategic importance than others. Right. If you look at things like rare earth minerals, which are important for technology, important for weapon systems and environment, we are unduly reliant on China. They're also important for batteries, and that gets us to electric vehicles, if you will. If you look at things like clothing and other items like that, the reason we get things out of China is because they can produce it a lot cheaper than we can, and therefore we get a cost benefit out of that. That's not really a strategic issue from the standpoint of our national security. There are ways to be able to deal with some of these issues. In some cases, if it's not only an economic issue but a national security issue, then you want to either onshore them back to the United States, or you want to reshore them to another country that is not a potential adversary. Some of that is going on right now, where they're manufacturing and other activities that are moving out of China and moving to Vietnam, moving to Indonesia or other areas, if you will. One item that you talked about that is of critical importance, both from an economic and a national security perspective, in addition to certain rare earth minerals, is high-end chip manufacturing. Taiwan manufactures, over 75% of high-end chips that are critically important for a variety of things: automobiles, appliances, certain weapon systems, etc. And that's why Taiwan is a lot more of strategic importance than most Americans realize. And in addition to the fact that their location is such that for shipping, a lot of the world's goods end up shipping through the Taiwan
For
Strait.
those hotel workers and people that get tips, you're going to be very happy.
I'm not sure that we invited the Donald to be able to address us at this time, so we'll move on.
I don't know how you beamed in here.
I'm glad he's watching. Maybe Biden's watching too. I'm sensing he's probably watching his son on trial right now, but that's a different story.
Right.
So I think the bottom line is there are certain things that we don't have that we have to rely upon others. When you're talking about things like rare earth minerals, we either have them or we don't. And if we don't have them, we got to figure out where we're going to get them. And in many cases, we haven't done that in a strategic way. All right, we've got to change that. The CHIPS Act. The CHIPS Act is passed. We're trying to onshore more chips production. It's going to take years to do that, but it's something that we should have recognized years ago. We should have started taking steps years ago. And that's where I say we lack a plan, right? So we're reactive. We're reacting late to things that we may not be able to do in a timely manner. So those are just a few thoughts.
Well, we should cozy up to Canada, which is the second largest in land area nation in the world. You're going to find a lot of rare earth up in Canada, and we're friends and neighbors. China will never stop knocking off our stuff. If you're trying to make a product in the U.S., you're going to call around. You're going to find out that getting it made in China is cheaper than any place else. Maybe, I don't know, except for Vietnam or something. And they're going to make it there, but they're also going to rip off your design. And then you're going to see something very similar for sale on Temu, which is like this China knockoff website where they just make everything for cheap. And the only way we can beat them, because we have to pay people $20, $25 an hour to make stuff over here, is to automate. Like when 3D printers started coming out, people were saying, oh yeah, everybody's going to have a 3D printer in their house to print out. That hasn't happened yet, but it should. We should make our own stuff.
That makes sense. Hey, just really quickly, I do have one other question, because I did see that recently China has been maybe sowing the seeds of discord with some of the other things that are going on in the world. Because I understand there's a multi-billion, I forget the exact amount, of proposal between China and Pakistan. And we know that the other leading global economy, which is India, is at war with Pakistan. So I'm thinking that that's part of the reason that China is laying in bed, if I could use that expression, with Pakistan. But I was just wondering your take on that, David, because I did see that they had recently put together this proposal and a trade package between those two world powers, that being China and Pakistan.
Well, first, I don't believe that India and Pakistan are at war. They are rivals,
Right.
And they're both. As you know, Pakistan is a nuclear power, as is India. Okay, India is a potential competitor to China.
Right.
They border China. There have been land disputes, territorial disputes before between China and India. As I said before, China's got a strategic plan, and they're trying to end up increasing their allies, decreasing our allies. It's logical for them to do something with Pakistan because Pakistan is, a check and balance to India, and therefore, makes sense. It's probably part of their Belt and Road Initiative. And if you look at their Belt and Road Initiative, you'll see that in many cases, their initiatives are not just with regard to countries that they would like to create better relations and, a potential alliance with, but there are countries that have rare earth minerals, that have port facilities, that have other types of attractive things from a geostrategic perspective. By the way, when you look at a lot of these projects that end up being undertaken by China as part of the Belt and Road Initiative, most of the work is done by Chinese workers. And if the country who is benefiting from the project can't keep up with the payments, the facilities and or rights end up converting to China. So you got to make sure that the caveat emptor, let the buyer beware when you're engaging into these transactions. But again, it just comes back to they think long range, they think strategically, they have a plan, and they act on it. And if you don't have a plan, as I've said many times, all you have is prayer. Don't get me wrong, I'm for prayer, but we need prayer and a plan.
Yeah, David, that brings us a question that I have. When you were working in Washington, D.C. and the comptroller, was there any long-term planning committee that existed in Washington? Even my homeowners association, we have a long-term planning committee when I sat on the board there. So I assume the U.S. government has a long-term planning committee. Do they have one in the United States of America?
Well, you know what they say about assume.
Yeah, I know. It's making one of me, but
we won't repeat it here. But
okay.
The answer is absolutely, positively not. When I came to the GAO in 1998, which is the only legislative branch agency that has government-wide scope, just like the Office of Management and Budget and the executive branch is the only executive branch agency that has government-wide scope. The GAO had never done a strategic plan, even though it had been around since 1921, by the way, the same year that the Office of Management and Budget was founded. And one of the first things that I did was to get it to do a strategic plan because, as I said, if you don't have a plan, all you have is prayer. And, you've got to try to maximize your impact, manage your risk, generate positive return on investment for the taxpayers who you're working for and your client, who in that case is the Congress. So we did. To this day, the only cross-government strategic planning approach that exists in the federal government is the GAO. The executive branch still does not have one. Individual departments and agencies have plans as part of the the Government Performance and Result Act. They're required to do periodic long-range plans. They're also required to do annual performance reports, but there is not a requirement for a consolidated government-wide plan. In addition to that, we also need to recognize the reality that plan has to focus on key desired outcomes. What I've been advocating for 25 years, not only the plan, but key national indicators. We want key outcome-based indicators, economic, diplomatic, military, cultural, I can go on, to be able to assess where we are, how we're doing, how we compare to others. I gave speeches on this to the, internationally back when I was Comptroller General through the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, and a number of countries moved out on it. And a number of countries are ahead of the United States right now with regard to having key national indicators and the long-range planning capability. But this is just another example where the U.S. has been a lag indicator, and that needs to change.
So should the U.S. have a Department of the Future, a cabinet-level department, and absorb other departments into it, like agriculture, education, health and welfare?
No, I think this type of plan, by the way, I'm working on an op-ed right now on this topic with a friend. And the op-ed talks about the fact that we've got to restructure government. It's grown too big, promised too much, subsidized too many, lost control of the budget. We're spending way more money than we take in, and we're not generating outcome-based results, even though we're spending a lot more than we're taking in. And therefore, it advocates for two things. It advocates for this strategic plan that I'm talking about, a movement towards more outcome-based indicators to right-size government, restructure government, if you will, and it advocates for it to be done within the Office of Management and Budget. The Office of Management and Budget reports directly to the President of the United States. It has a government-wide perspective. You link resources to results. The budget side is the most powerful side at OMB. You need to link, the resources with the results. That's the management side. Planning needs to be part of it. I don't think you need a new department. Frankly, I think we have too many departments already. And I think one of the things that we have to do is re-baseline the government, which in many cases means, consolidating, and even potential eliminating certain entities as compared to where we are today.
I don't claim to be the economist that you are. I never would claim to be that and everything. But I just wanted to, I've had several conversations both on this network and just in general public and everything, is how much are we able to maintain the gold-based currency that we currently have? Because I've had several people that have told me that the gold-based currency is in trouble and that we might need to look at other type of currencies as well. So I just wanted your take on that as one that is an economist, because I've had several people in different environments that have told me that they are feeling that we're going to have to shift away from that at some point or another.
We abandoned the gold-based currency over 50 years ago.
Yeah,
our currency is a fiat currency. It's backed by nothing other than the full faith and credit of the United States government. And people are getting increasingly concerned about the full faith and credit of the United States government.
So is China expansionistic, and what does that expansionism look like?
China clearly wants to be able to dominate its region of the world. That doesn't mean that it wants to dominate the world. I think one of the things that we have to recognize is that, things have changed dramatically since the end of World War II, where we had over 50% of global GDP. We were one of just a few major countries that weren't significantly harmed by World War II. By that, I mean our infrastructure. Canada was another one. Australia was another one, if you will. Most of Europe was devastated, during World War II. Japan was devastated during World War II. But now we're about 24% of global GDP, which is less than half of what we were. The dollar is not as good as gold anymore. We face changing alliances against not just U.S. interests, but Western interests, led by China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. There are other countries that are joining. The BRICS are expanding to try to create alternatives in a number of ways, including alternatives to the U.S. dollar. Which is also one of the reasons why we got to put our finances in order, because if we don't put our finances in order, that's just going to be another reason for people to move away from the dollar, since it isn't backed by any, tangible asset, much less gold.
Yeah, but aren't we going to have a real problem? I mean, the thing is that as China keeps moving up, the way I see it, they're very intelligent, they're really hardworking, they're very competitive, they're very ambitious, and over a period of time, it's quite possible their standard of living exceeds that of the average American. Are we going to have a problem that the U.S. is going to fall behind China? In other words, if I understand China and they have those four factors, they have a plan. We don't have a plan. We're not very competitive. We're not very ambitious. We're not very hardworking. The only thing I saw that we did good is we shipped 10,000 McDonald's over to them, or at least they're establishing 10,000 McDonald's, which will make them fat and lazy like the United States of America. That's kind of our internal sabotage. But other than that, David, are the Chinese people going to actually have higher standard of livings than they have here in the U.S.?
I don't believe so. You have to understand what Rick said at the outset. China has a declining population. They have a serious demographic problem, not just with regard to an aging society, but you've got to keep in mind for a long time they had the one-child policy, which creates additional problems, including their fertility rate. we have a problem too. I mean, our fertility rate is, I think, 1.62 per female, which means that we will have a declining population as well if we don't end up having positive immigration. We need immigration, but we need intelligent immigration. There's a difference between legal immigration and illegal immigration. And I think one of the big reasons that Biden is likely to be defeated in November is because he's totally lost control of the border. Totally lost control of the border. And more Americans are finding that totally unacceptable. Are we still on?
Yeah, we're still on.
Yeah, we're still on.
I didn't see your friendly faces, okay?
We're still on. Hey, David, just really quickly.
Also, look at GDP per capita, okay? Look at average income. We're still well ahead. But we do need to recognize that without a plan, that is an additional vulnerability that we have, and it's one that we can fix. Let me give you an example on sustainability. We got a lot of young people that are concerned about climate change, and they're concerned about environmental sustainability. That's a legitimate issue. I mean, the climate is changing. Man plays a role. I'm not so sure how much, but it does play a role. But that's an example of where we can do everything possible to try to do our part. But if China and India and other countries don't do their part, you'll never be successful, because air and water and other environmental situations don't respect geopolitical boundaries. So it's a legitimate issue. We need to do our part, but we can't solve the problem. On the other hand, let's go back to our finances. We have unsustainable financial situation. That's something we can fix, and we need to fix, because if we don't fix, it's going to have serious adverse economic, diplomatic, military, and cultural domestic tranquility implications. And if we don't fix it, it'll have a serious adverse global implication. Serious adverse global implication. So I tell our young people, you shouldn't just be concerned about the environment. You should be just as concerned, if not more so, with regard to putting our finances in order, because we can solve that problem. And if we don't solve that problem, you're going to bear a disproportionate share of the burden, and the world's going to suffer as well.
But David, along those same lines and everything, and that comes back to what I was asking, because that's really where I was going from those conversations I had before, because some of these people are into digital currency, and all along those lines that we're bringing this question of the gold-based currency and everything, because they will sometimes point out that there is a push for digital gold and a digital gold platform, and some of the ones that they want to go to seem very problematic, including some from China, because a lot of times they're saying it's going to be backed by Venmo or by China's Alipay, which is a Chinese-based company. And it looked like, I think it was 2 months ago, Zimbabwe launched a gold-backed currency called ZIG, and it seems like it's one of those digital currencies. So I just wanted your take on that, because this seems to be something that China is very much pushing, partially through BRICS, but partially through other methods as well. So I just wanted your take on this notion of a digital gold platform, which would be similar to the old gold-based platform.
You said the magic word, Zimbabwe. Mm-hmm. This is a $100 trillion Zimbabwe bill. $100 trillion. It's the real deal. Maybe it's worth $1, except for a collector's item. I will say this. Steps have been taken by China and others to be able to accumulate more gold, with the possibility of moving towards a gold-based currency for them, not us. All right. Steps are being taken to try to move away from the dollar as the primary reserve currency, to be able to engage in trade in other currencies and or baskets of currency. All the more reason why we need to put our finances in order if we want to try to stem that flow. Because if people lose confidence in our ability to put our finances in order, that's going to have a serious impact on our currency. It's going to have a serious impact on interest rates. That will have an adverse impact on economic growth and opportunity. So let's get serious fast and let's have a plan. And
I've got a weird question for you, David, which is the U.S. leads the world in entertainment. We provide entertainment to the world more than any other place. And as AI and other tech reduces work hours, those hours that are freed up are going to be filled with entertainment. But the entertainment industry is hurting right now. It didn't come back great from the writers and actors strike. Do we need to push the entertainment industry to make sure that we continue to dominate the world?
May I ask you, Rick, would you agree that when we're talking about education, we should also provide education for future entertainers?
Yeah, I mean, and also entertainment needs to be attached to education, because 100 years ago, school was the most interesting part of your day. If you are living on a farm, all you're seeing is the ass end of a mule as you're plowing. You go to school, you learn new stuff. It's interesting. Now school's boring because the rest of your life is boring. Do we need to? So anyway.
Well, I think one of the real questions you have to ask about the entertainment industry, and I know they're concerned about it, is what's the impact of AI going to have on them?
Yeah, it's infiltrating now.
I know. You're right. We lead on entertainment. I don't think we can build our economy on entertainment, but it is something that we're a leader on, and we ought to try to maintain that leadership. But by the way, guess which country owns the largest movie chain in the United States?
Isn't it China?
China. And do you think that's having any impact on what movies are shown or not shown?
Yeah, you can't make, if you're making a blockbuster, the bad guy cannot be Chinese, because
right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, they don't like that. We do have some interesting comments.
It's part of the plan, by the way. It's part of the plan.
Yeah, we don't have a plan, but they do. Here's one comment that we have from one of our viewers, which I find to be quite interesting on that. What about the students here in the U.S. who have a large amount of debts, and we give all of our jobs to China? In other words, you accumulate debts to become a IT professional, and then you find out that the U.S. corporations hire the people in Chinese to do the work, and all you do in the U.S. is accumulate a lot of student debt.
And Nick, I'd like to ask you, what do you think about Chinese buying all the students, U.S. students' debts? So they will get even larger debt against the States. Do you think
first, the student debt situation needs fundamental reform. Okay, we need to look at on what basis are we giving loans to students, at what interest rate, on what terms should repayment be, on what basis should debt be forgiven. I'm all for reforming the student debt system. I'm all for providing more reasonable interest rates. I'm all for student loan debt forgiveness in exchange for service, not just as a matter of, gee, we're just going to give it up, okay, because that's irresponsible, inequitable, and, by the way, unconstitutional. And I think the president's already been struck down one time on his attempt to relieve huge amounts of student debt. I think he's going to be struck down again. I think it's a false promise. He's trying to play to young people to try to get votes. He's doing other things to try to get votes, given his current polling situation. I also think you have to keep in mind that not everybody is bound for college, that there are plenty of things that you can do without going to college, in the STEM area, like in the trades, in technology. There's a lot of people that are in the technology field that never went to college, including some of the billionaires that own the technology companies. So I think we need to step back and we need to reassess. This is part of the plan. What do we need for economic growth and to stay competitive? How does that relate to our education system? What do we need to do to reform our education system to promote economic growth and individual opportunity? Recognizing the differences between things that might require higher levels of education and things that may not require higher levels of education. If we want to provide support, we shouldn't just provide it for higher levels of education. We should think about providing it for trade schools and other areas where we need people. Okay, and in the end, we need to learn from others, including countries like Germany, where they do a much better job of macroeconomic planning and trying to match the needs of the overall economy to the interest and the abilities of the individual, because people are going to do better on things that they like. And we got a lot of people that went and got degrees that frankly aren't marketable. And with the significant increase in cost in recent years, are having a tough time making it.
So there are two issues with student debt, and nobody ever talks about the two. One is, do you want to pay off student debt? But the other, we can argue about that. But the other thing is that the lenders and administrators of these loans are absolute crap. They have terrible customer service. The people who work the phones for those people are trained to not help people. 60 Minutes and other people have done reports on how bad these companies are, which is kind of a separate issue. They have zero accountability. And if you wanted to fix student debt, one thing you could do is make sure that your loan is properly administered. Another thing to do, if you don't want to knock, if you think it's not fair to knock 10 grand or 20 grand off of every borrower's debt, then why not just cap the interest rate at 5% or even less if you're doing public service?
Well, I think looking at the interest rate is an appropriate way to do it, and debt forgiveness for service rendered is also an appropriate way to do it. But being able to do it, there's a difference between providing relief and forgiving the loan. And there's a difference from a constitutional standpoint as well, because you have to keep in mind the largest asset on the U.S. government's financial statements, and you can check me out on this, is student loans. It's a liability of the individual. It's an asset for the United States. It's about $1.7, $1.8 trillion. No president, I don't care who they are and what their intent is, should be able to give away assets of the U.S. government without the express consent of the Congress. And that's what's wrong. But does the system need fundamental reform along the lines of, Rick, what you and I have just talked about? Absolutely.
We have a comment from Twitter. I think this is, or Twitch, excuse me. It's one of our distribution sources.
Nice picture.
I know, that's what I thought. Well, this I think is Twitch, which is a place where chess players are on all the time, believe it or not. It's for the first time in history in humans, the measurable IQ has gone down in the USA. I don't know if that's true or not, Rick, since you're
anytime you talk about the IQ of a whole population, you get in trouble, because how do you measure that? How do you know for sure? And also when you talk about which country has a higher average IQ than some other country, then you're in the company of a bunch of creepy racists.
I just read it, Nick.
They say that dumb young people can't understand their personal finances, let alone long-term national finances. Are we having a problem with the dumbing down of America?
Let's talk about several things here. All right, okay. Several things here. One, there's absolutely no question that the way that we handled COVID had an adverse impact on learning. There's absolutely no question, and it's going to take a while to be able to recover from that. Secondly, you know as well as I do that I've advocated for a long time for mandatory financial literacy and civic education courses before you can graduate from high school. You shouldn't be able to graduate from high school, which everybody is required to go through high school, until you've passed courses on those two issues. They are fundamental, if you will, and one of the reasons why I think that we're so dysfunctional right now. Never follow the bad example of the federal government. Thirdly, I think before you take a student loan, you need to be able to have certain information provided to you in a manner that that you can understand it before you sign up for any loan, so you really have a better understanding of what you're agreeing to and what the terms and conditions are. That is in addition to what Rick and I talked about before with fundamentally changing, the student loan program with regard to interest rates and what circumstances do you provide relief in exchange for what type of service, et cetera.
I'd
So
like to ask
it's not
Andy
even-
a question, just a sec. Because I'm not a U.S. citizen and I may lack knowledge of the students' loan issue. Let's talk about any companies that provides loans. Let's say you're buying real estate, you're going to the bank and they provide you a loan backed by the asset, which is real estate in this case. So in case of students' loan, when banks are providing those loans, the guarantee of the asset, which is the knowledge and degrees which will be achieved by the people who will get this degrees thanks to the loans, is not an asset. Actually, it cannot be collateralized, it cannot be collected upon. So you need something else to guarantee these loans, which is US government. Why would US government guarantee such soft assets as probably half of the students who will get degree? They will never use them in the real life. They will go to serve at McDonald's and some other restaurants rather than work in their specialty. So all concept is horrible because the company that sells, let's see, you sell some items, let's see, a car. So if your car manufacturer will provide a warranty and it still could be have some value after so many years, so it will retain maybe only 33% of its value, but there is still 33%, and there is no such thing as government would guarantee this because the product itself has a value of some kind. Now, in this situation, so you recognize, whether you want it or not, that this students' loans provided a means of acquisition of very questionable value at the best. So what's a business of United States government to deal with this?
Well, first, I think it's important to know that some companies actually provide student loan relief for people that they hire. But those are obviously circumstances where the students have graduated from a recognized university with a valuable degree, and it's just, it's part of their ways to attract and retain good people. Okay. Secondly, it used to be that the loans were provided by banks and guaranteed by the government, but now it's my understanding that the government is providing all the loans and guaranteeing all the loans. It's not being, it may be administered by a third party, but the government is directly involved, not indirectly involved. That's why it's on the balance sheet, because if the government was just guaranteeing it, it wouldn't be on the balance sheet. It would be in the footnotes. Thirdly, I think that, again, let's get back to the plan. What do we need to maximize economic growth and individual opportunity? What role should the government play in trying to encourage people to go into certain fields to achieve what degrees? Once you shouldn't be providing it across the board. Right now, you can get a student loan from a marginal institution for a degree that frankly is just flat not marketable. Okay. And that you couldn't support repaying the student loan even if you got a job. All right. You shouldn't be making loans like that. All right. But if you end up getting a degree in an area that the country needs, that you have an ability to repay, and there are reasonable terms under which you repay it, that kind of system can work. But it shouldn't just be for colleges and universities. It should be for technical training, for skills training and things of that nature. So the whole system needs to basically be reviewed and re-engineered.
So I want to go back to COVID for a sec. There are issues not just with how we managed COVID, but what COVID has done to us. 3/4 of all Americans have had COVID at least once. And there's a lot of evidence that COVID does a job on your brain, especially the more times you get it. So if there's been a decline in thinking, or people are crazier and you see it in traffic, it might be that COVID ate our brains a little bit. We saw it after the world caught Spanish flu in 1918. The 20 years after that, the world descended into fascism and depression and war. And one way to address it, again, is technology. If we're all getting a little stupider, then we're going to need technology to be our babysitters. And again, that's an opportunity for America to lead the world in, AI assistants who help you manage your life, even if COVID made you dumb.
Yeah, and I don't see that we have any long-term plan on doing that, Rick, because
Yeah, but all we need is the market to have
like
a little, your cell phone, we put little legs on it, it crawls up your shirt, it sits next to you on your shoulder, and it whispers into your ear like it tells you what to do.
Yeah, but it seems to me we have our long-term plan is knee-jerk reaction to whatever takes place in the world, and that's all we do.
We have way more than our fair share of laggards rather than leaders.
Yeah.
At the beginning of this country, we had way more than our fair share of leaders, and we have strayed from the principles and values that made this country great. We can recover, but we need to wake up. We need to take steps sooner rather than later.
A lot of media tells Americans that they're okay just the way they are. That you're
Really?
Yeah, and that you get a participation trophy if you just show up.
Okay, yeah, I think we do have some serious problems, but right now our problem is we have to end our show. So we want to thank the Honorable David M. Walker,
Thanks,
the former
everybody.
Comptroller General of the United States, our commentators from around the world, and we'll see you next week on Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. Until then, have a good week and stay out of trouble. Bye-bye.
Be good.